Good noon, everyone. You might be wondering what a lawyer and a scuba diver, because that's what I read in my profile in the film, doing here and doing work in public transport in a third country like the Philippines. You know, there's a lot of regulation involved here, and that's precisely probably the reason why the president appointed me there. But as a scuba diver, I'm not too sure about that unless you have a very strong advocacy. And then when I get into the office, there's nothing like having to have that spirit inside to get things done, especially in the present state of our public transportation system. Before I continue, I have to admit that the talk of Cameron earlier got me very, very uncomfortable. Reason for that is because I can relate with it, and probably you'll see why. 3 questions. What? Why? How? Very basic. But these are very powerful words. These are questions that we need to ask, especially in the work that we do. What? What is the state of our public transportation in the Philippines? That is what it is. It's deemed unsafe, unhealthy, unreliable, uncomfortable. And it's very polluted. In fact, we appreciate the work of GIZ, having to work and partner with us and having to look into the real state of our public transportation system. Obviously, the PUJ, by the way, the PUJ is what you call a paratransit. In most countries, especially in third and second world countries, you normally would have only 2 types of public mode, of rail, and then you have the bus. But in the Philippines, there are other kinds. You have the jeep, you have the van, you have even the tricycle. That's our iconic jeepney in the Philippines, if you happen to visit there. And it has been there since after World War II. And it's something emotional to a lot of people, especially to the jeepney drivers and operators. And that's the reason why there are a lot of opposition in what we're doing to improve and modernize our public transportation system. Okay? And it's causing a lot of pollution, by the way. Okay? The number 1 cause of pollution, especially in Metro Manila, which is a metropolis of about 12 million. It goes to about 13 to 14 million during the day because people from the neighboring provinces would move in for work or study and go back to their homes in the neighboring provinces. That's a lot of people to move around. No? We have a mantra in our Department of Transportation that we move people, not cars. And that's a huge responsibility that we have taken. More so, when the state of public transport for a long, long time in the Philippines is about what Prateep have said about it's very risky if it's business as usual. We have to change the mindset, we have to change the model, we have to change the system. And basically, we need to change the culture as well. And what's happening there because of the present state of our public transport? GIZ study back in 2014, 2.4 billion pesos is lost every day in terms of pollution, health cost, business opportunities. People have to travel something like 2 hours from home to work and another 2 hours going back home. It's typical. And then I have to emphasize this, that for a long, long time, the Philippines has been, and that we have to change, by the way, because it's a car-centric model that has been there for a long time. I think it's patterned after the United States, but we don't have highways, wider roads in the Philippines. We have very limited road capacity, and that's the reason why we need to improve on our public transportation system. And obviously, it's very distressing and very discomforting when it comes to commuting because we probably have the most inefficient public transport in any country that you've been to. That's what it is. It's one huge parking space in our main highway. Okay? So probably the only thing that's efficient is right there in the middle, our rail. But it's not even as good as the one we have here in Germany. But, it's more than good enough to move people, insofar as the rail is concerned, about 300 to 400,000 a day for this line. Okay? But you cannot move as many and as fast if you have this atmosphere on the road. How was public transport planned before? No government-led planning of road transport. You know, when we look at having to plan public transport, we have to look at it from a much bigger picture. In a metropolis of 12 million, you have to understand that it's a huge responsibility in moving people from where they are to where they want to go, whether it be for work, recreation, study, or anything that they want to do, because it's about the freedom of mobility that we're trying to respond to. But what has happened, however, is that there has, since, as mentioned, there is no government-led planning. Probably a typical businessman or entrepreneur would probably have to think about, okay, there are so many people lining up on the street, I can probably make money there. He goes to the government, gets a franchise, and probably be able to take about 4 jeepneys on the road, and he makes money. And that's what's happening to about 150 or almost 200,000 jeepney operators, thinking independently on how you're going to make money. There is no system, so to speak, on having to plan out from a much bigger perspective. So there's widespread competition with so many operators, independent operators, of different modes. Okay? So you have bus, you have jeepney, and all around. You also have no hierarchy of modes. This is another type of public transport that we have. It's what you call a tricycle, and that competes on the same road with a jeepney. Okay? And notwithstanding the fact that you have probably have a wide, say 5 or 4 lane highway, all of that, or most of it, except for 1 lane here, is occupied by the jeepneys. So very inefficient, and it's taking a lot of road space. On the other side of the equation is that you have people lining for public transport. So you could just imagine that you might probably think there are a lot of public utility jeepneys, and yet this is a common sight in Manila. So, and what's happening also on the road, especially insofar as there's so much on-street competition, as I've said earlier, because what has happened is that there are so many hundreds of thousands of public utility operators thinking, operating, and managing their own fleet independently, and that's why they're competing on the road. So there's chaos on the streets, and as I mentioned earlier, as made a study of GIZ said, among the major cause of accidents are actually involving public utility vehicle. As a result, on the part of the drivers and operators, low income, very exhausted because they have to work for longer working hours. They're prone to accidents. You know, if you're going to work, for example, 10, 12, 13 hours every day, obviously your mental alertness will go down as you work longer. Also, another concern that we have, a major concern actually, is bus accidents. If I have to emphasize, that is something that we, and I can say this on a personal note, we, the President and I, feel very passionately about. For every passenger that dies on the street, it's something that we take it very personally. This happened in Mindoro. 19 people died. Why? Because of driver's error as well as mechanical defect. So the main objective is actually to modernize our fleet and come up with a system by which we'll be able to run it in a more efficient manner. Okay? And how we're going to do that, obviously, I think we would like to see the buses here in Berlin, right in the Philippines. Modern buses, Euro 4, Euro 5, Euro 6 compliant, and probably electric jeeps. We have the standard CCTV card payment system. But at the same time, we need to understand data. And I appreciate the previous speaker earlier about having to understand data, where people move, how people move, and where they want to go at certain times of the day, days of the week. We were able to get this data from, among others, the telco, without having to get into the privacy issues here. We just want to know, in general, where people move. So that is how we're able to collect. And so from this data, we'll be able to run the routes, identify the routes and run it. This is another data that we're able to get so that we'll be able to know where they are at certain times of the day. Okay. On some point, however, is that you have Grab and Uber in Asia, and recently Uber got out of the Asia operation because it was bought by Grab, which is actually the largest ride-hailing company in Asia. But we had some issues with them before, but now because it's a matter of regulation, I think it's the one thing that we probably have to understand, that technology and regulation might have to come hand in hand. We know that technology comes, it runs too fast, that regulation, legal for that matter, legal restrictions, it's quite too slow to adopt the technology. We understand that fully well. So, we were the first country, as they say, which were able to regulate the ride-hailing model. As it is, those are the numbers that we're looking at. But the technology about having to connect drivers with the rider is so good that we're now adapting it to the taxi. We have now made it mandatory for taxis operators to have the apps similar to Grab and Uber. So basically, the public transportation system is the transformational and, in fact, if I may say, probably the largest non-infra project of the Duterte administration so far. To end this, perhaps, if you can see, it's so large scale that practically the entire range of the government machinery is all there involved. And including our government partners, international partners, including GIZ, ADB, UNDP, World Bank, and all the rest. We are presenting to you a problem, and we're presenting to you a solution. Hopefully, we'll be able to get you involved in this project that we have. We're trying to not only modernize our public transportation system, but we need to change a mindset that has been there. You just don't know how politically heavy we are on this one. There's a lot of risk, but there's no way to move forward if we need to change the public transportation in the Philippines. Again, I would like to end my speech by having to quote again Cameron, because I got so disturbed about it. You're not done with your mission on Earth if you're alive. Obviously, I'm still here, so I think there's still a lot of things that we need to do in the coming years to come. Thank you very much, and good noon.